The son of Hammerland returns. It is returning. We're doing it right now. That's how returned it is.
That's right.
And last month we talked about The Scream of Fear from 1961. Now we're talking about another 1961 movie, returning to the great Terence Fisher, who brought us so many Hammerland classics in the Dracula and Frankenstein kind of realms. But we're talking about a different universal monster that was kind of taken in by Hammer and reinterpreted, the Wolfman or the werewolf. This is The Curse of the Werewolf from 1961. I'm very excited to talk about this movie. AC, are you excited to talk about this movie?
I am excited to talk about this movie. And yes, we just talked about Terence Fisher the month before when we did The Mummy. You know, he was kind of their go-to reinterpreter of the Universal classics. So it's not surprising he was handed the reins. He was also, I don't think we're talking about it, but he did Phantom of the Opera in 1962. So, I mean, really, it was kind of like, he was their go-to guy. So there's a reason why he's become, Hammer royalty.
Again, that'll be for next year's stepson of Hammerland. No, I was watching this movie, and I don't know if you paid attention to what I'm doing on Kicking the Seat. And this is not a knock because, everyone's crazy busy.
I try.
Oh, well, I've taken a year-long moratorium on superhero movies.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So, and I kept thinking about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which is a little more than a half hour longer than The Curse of the Werewolf. And it's dense and packed full of stuff, but there is more artistry and character development and ideas in this little hour and a half, 50 or 60-year-old Hammer film about a werewolf than there was in like the last 3 Marvel movies I've watched. I don't know how that happens, but I think that Terence Fisher was like the Kevin Feige of his day for the Hammerland, for Hammer films.
Well, and I mean, we must credit producer Anthon Hinds.
Yes,
because this was his first script as John Elder, which is his pseudonym. He assumed a pen name or a screen name so that he wouldn't see his name popping up over and over again in the credits, was how he put it. But yeah, it's he would go on to write quite a few. Him and Jimmy Sangster, were responsible for a lot of the original Hammer classics. And so you'll see John Elder's name popping up time and time again. And I think Michael Carreras, who I think exec produced it, this one, if not that one, you'll certainly see Michael Carreras popping up. He's the son of James Carreras, who was the head of Hammer. But his pen name was Henry Younger, as a kind of a dig against John Elder, which I thought was funny.
I love that. All right, so let's set the table with this werewolf movie where I'm going to go back to the Disney Marvel thing for a second, because I just got off of 6 weeks worth of complaining about this TV show they held called Moon Knight, which is like ostensibly about this superhero who's possessed by the Egyptian god of the moon, but he's got a superhero costume and he fights evil. In the 6 hours of that show, the actual Moon Knight character showed up for about 17 minutes spread across 6 episodes, and it was a big disappointment for me. However, the werewolf, the titular werewolf, is in this movie for maybe 5 minutes. Yeah. And I had no problem with that at all, because there's so much else going on in the story that, it almost works as a drama. This isn't so much a horror film. I mean, I understand based on your definition or kind of agreed definition of horror, it is, but it really is more of a drama where this guy has an affliction that he just really has to wrestle with, and so do the other people in his life. It just happens to result in terrifying murders.
Well, what's interesting is, and I did a little bit of reading about this in prep for today. It's a very kind of atypical werewolf movie in that there isn't this, kind of cause and effect. He doesn't get bitten by a werewolf, which is, the traditional means of becoming a werewolf, is that you get bitten and therefore you carry on the curse. Instead, he is truly cursed. Like, fate has it in for him. And fate has it in for several of the characters throughout. And they just kind of find themselves in this situation that leads to another kind of turning of the screw. And, in that regard, I think it's a fascinating, it's kind of, there's a lot of grab bag of all of the different werewolf legends. I mean, we see a silver bullet and we see, a transformation, and, like we see that kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing going on, but it's none of the things that we've actually seen before. It kind of almost like a flip of the Mummy movie that I had an issue with. Just like, it was kind of like all the mummy movies in one. It's like there's so many different elements of werewolf movies, and yet it is its own creature.
Yeah, and much like a lot of these films that we're talking about, I have not seen the Universal Wolfman movies. I think my only really experience with this character is with the Benicio del Toro Wolfman, which I guess was Universal Picture, but that was like,
Sure.
12 years ago, whatever, which I thought was awful and did not inspire me to go seek out the source. But you're right. What I know of the lore is that usually there's there's a bite, or there's some kind of like a gypsy curse, as they like to call it, that afflicts our main character, and then the moon comes up and he transforms into this rampaging beast, and we get a bit of that. But the first almost half hour, almost a third of this movie is establishing the lead up to the introduction of our main character.
That's right.
That was a really ballsy and creative move, because the whole time I'm watching, like, is this beggar character that we follow around Spain, is he going to be the werewolf? Because he doesn't look like Oliver Reed. I don't know what's going on here.
Right.
But they set up this really demented society. He goes to this kingdom where everything is kind of shut down and everybody's poor, because there's a big feast for the Marquess, who's getting, I think it's his wedding day, and he's kind of holding court with all these, obscenely rich and obscenely obscene people. The beggar wanders in and ends up becoming the entertainment. He gets drunk and he gets like thrown a chicken or a goose bone or something. No, it wasn't goose, because the goose was thrown out and stomped, and and the Marquess like humiliated the chef. And the beggar ends up getting thrown in a dungeon where he meets once again, I don't know what it is with Hammer's obsession with like mute peasant girls, but there's a mute peasant girl that he meets, and they kind of develop a relationship, sort of. And then over the course of years, she blossoms into womanhood, and the Marquess puts the moves on her, and she kind of like freaks out. He tosses her has her tossed in the same cell as the beggar, who is completely like out of his mind at this point, and he attacks her. And I was not ready for that. There was no it doesn't help that she can't speak, because I have a feeling if she could, it'd be like, don't you recognize me? It's me. It's whatever. But he's just completely out of his gourd. And you're like, I wonder what happened there as she is swiped out of frame, and then she wakes up. She's got scratch marks all over herself, and we find out that she was with child. So the worst possible thing. And I was like, this is I was going to say progressive. It's not. Advanced storytelling beyond what I think you'd even get away with today.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's the thing, like that's kind of the tragedy of it, is that it is the beast within. We see this beggar, who they, as you say, they've developed a friendship such as it is, based on her feeding it, but like any lion in a cage, it's like if you go into the cage, you become the prey. And I think that's kind of because I think she would have said, don't you recognize me? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. I'm a beast. And I think that's what we continue, Leon, who ends up being the child who is born, that is something he struggles with throughout his short and tragic life, is the beast within that keeps coming out and keeps emerging at inopportune times.
And there's the peasant girl is attacked. She does survive, but she ends up going out and living in the woods, and she kind of becomes, there's kind of I think like a narration or something, a voiceover. She kind of becomes not exactly a legend, but she's like this thing that just lives out, in nature. And she's discovered by this guy who's happening along one day, and he pulls her out of the lake, brings her home, says to his very understanding wife, like, hey, look what I found. And this like kind of team of people nurses her back to health. The baby is born, and there's this really weird conversation. I wonder if this is the sort of movie's convoluted logic as to what the curse is, because I can't remember the name of this couple, but I'll just call her the wife. She says that she hopes the baby is not born on Christmas, because Christmas is coming up, and that's the day that the peasant girl is due.
Right.
Because a baby born on Christmas is an affront to heaven. What?
Well, it's the Lord's day, you don't go sharing a birthday. You and I share a birthday. So, it's not an affront to you and I, but neither of us are deities, or we're both deities. So we're fine with it.
But there's this whole superstition about, like, they say that the women stay away from the men between the months of March and April to avoid a December 25th pregnancy.
That's right. I did not know that, but I like that. If that was true, I think that's pretty great. I think it's his housekeeper. They're not actually married. It's just his housekeeper, and because I think he's he's just an aristocrat.
I was watching this at, like, again, 4:30 in the morning, so I might not have picked up on all the details, especially because they are together, at least a unified presence in the film throughout. I just got the idea that they were an old married couple, but
yeah, no,
that kind of makes sense.
I don't believe Don Alfredo is married. He is because he's not had any offspring himself. They have never had any offspring.
Yeah. But so they raise young Leon as one of their own. They discover that, when animals show up in the village with their throats torn out, and he is going out at night and he's having nightmares, and then he shows up with fangs. And I laughed out loud when he was at
the window.
Not so much that it was funny, but I think it was earlier than that, when Don Alfredo was at the kid's bedside talking about a dream he had.
Oh, right.
And he looks and he sees the hairy palms. I'm like, it's that age. But it's, and there's this idea of kind of protecting the kid. It's not like they're going to burn him at the stake or turn him over to some authorities because there's something wrong with him. It's almost like the Ma and Pa Kent discovering young Kal-El in the spaceship. They realize he's different. They realize that the world would not understand him, but they're going to try and bring him up and accept him as much as they can.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is kind of the underlying message of this movie, more so I think than any other Hammer horror, is this idea. I think, kind of to your point about it not being so much a horror as a drama, is that it is about the power and redemptive quality of love. That is the only thing that keeps him from transforming. And they put the bars on the window, keep him from getting out at night. And the hunter ends up shooting a wolf. No, he shoots a dog, one of the neighbor's dogs. And the murder spree of sheep across the country has been quelled. But it's because Leon was locked up, and because he was shown love and tenderness, and so the beast quiets. And what we find later on is that, when those baser emotions, such as God, no, not lust, when lust arises in young Leon's heart, that the beast awakens again. And when the woman, we'll get our full synopses in a second, but like when Christina shows him love, he's able to go through the evening. He sleeps peacefully through the night without transforming. So it's a really, it's a kind of marvelous little fairy tale that is being told, so much so that, like the beggar rapes the servant girl and then conveniently dies. And then she gives birth and then conveniently dies. And it's like, that happens in fairy tales. Like the character serves its purpose and then is immediately moved out of the story so we can go on.
It's also the inciting incident for every Disney movie.
That's right.
But no, and that's I kept going back to the kind of the Christ allegory throughout the movie, because
it's in there.
It is. From the redemptive character of Christina to, at the end, I'm jumping ahead here, but there's an angry mob scene, but you see we'll call her the house attendant, the housekeeper, the woman that I thought was Leon's stepmother, kind of. We see her and like a couple other people kind of standing by while this mob is gathering to crucify the one who shouldn't be there. That reminded me very much of Mary and all that during the crucifixion scene. But I do wonder what not that this is a fault of the screenwriting, because I think this story could work as some kind of an allegory for how religions don't necessarily, and superstitions don't necessarily, have internal consistency. But if the idea is this baby was born on Christmas as an affront to heaven, and so it's cursed, but the only thing that can really keep the beast at bay is the redemptive power of love. I'm like, who's writing these rules?
Well, and the answer is Anthony Hinds, because, and I think he is just kind of creating his own mythology. And quickly, we'll just kind of like just continue with the synopses.
Yeah.
So after Leon grows to adulthood, he goes out to seek his fortune, and he ends up in the company of a winemaker or a wine distributor, and falls in love with I forget his name, but falls in love with his daughter, Christina.
Right.
And then, like they are kind of, she is betrothed to another, and they are having, their affair in secret, Leon and Christina. And then the one night that he's taken out to go carousing with his buddy. And that's when he meets a woman of the evening, and lust enters his heart, and the beast comes, tearing out. And
she's a fiery redhead, yes.
Yes, she is. And red is the color of the frame after he's done with her.
Yeah, and that leads to sort of, multiple murders in this scene, including, what was the name of this guy? I'm trying to figure out Martin Matthews as Jose, who's this movie's all kind of weird because it takes place in Spain. You got half the people like speaking, in sort of like proper British accents, and half the people not, and then like half the people are like, oh, this is Dominique, and here's Jose, but is obviously played by this like weird James Corden looking dude who I really liked this character.
Yeah,
and I gotta say, one of the big surprises and honest heartbreaks was when he gets taken out by the beast, because I'm like, no, not him,
not Jose.
because he's just such a good guy. He's the roommate of Leon, working in the little wine cellar. I loved his kind of opening line. Leon's like, so I was told that you would tell me what to do. He's like, yep, you got your red wine, you got your white wine, you got your bottles, and you got your labels. The label goes on the outside, the wine goes on the inside. He's just so fun and fun loving, and you don't get the feeling there's a malicious bone in his body, and he really wants to help his new friend. He's kind of drags him out dancing because that's what you do on Saturday, because it's payday, and this is how he gets repaid, is by being choked and thrown against a wall and having his back broken. Jeez.
Life is tough in Spain. It is. Now, again, probably worth mentioning, this is based on Guy Endor's novel, The Werewolf of Paris. And the reason it's not set in Paris, that novel, oddly enough, was written in 1933. And in 1935, The Werewolf of London came out from Universal. But Werewolf of Paris is the source material. It's pretty loosely adapted for this film. But the reason it's set in Spain is because Hammer had another production that was supposed to be filmed called The Rape of Sabine, and that was set in Spain. And so Bernard Robinson had built this massive, Spanish, all these sets and things. And then Rape of Sabine was canceled. And they had,
as it would have been today with a title like that.
Yeah. And so with all these sets lying around, they said, well, I guess we're in Spain now. And so that was how it came to be transplanted from Paris to Spain.
And it works. I mean,
it does. It works great.
Yeah. We've talked before about the sets, and that certainly is the case here. This place looks like,
and I feel like
I could live in and want to visit, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, minimal effort has ever been made to, actually do anything other than there's a bunch of English actors, taking up space. They're clearly always English. Occasionally we'll get like that kind of weird Germanic quality to one of the supporting characters, but mostly it's just good, proper Englishmen doing proper English things.
Well, I got to say, I thought about the movie Highlander. When the guy, is it what is the name of the old guy? Is it Pepe Valente, or is it,
wait, which one? Which old guy?
The guy who owns the winery.
Oh yeah, I think that. Well, actually, I think Pepe is the one who's the hunter.
Okay, I'm just looking at IMDb, and these.
Yep, I am as well.
They all kind of look the same at these little thumbnails. Or is it Don Enrique?
It is Don Enrique.
Okay, Don Enrique.
Yeah. Oh no, nope. Sorry, Don Enrique is the mayor, so it's Don Fernando.
Don Fernando. Too many Dons.
There's so many Dons. Yeah, Don Enrique. I have a fun fact about Don Enrique, but we'll go on to Don Fernando first.
Don Fernando, when he shows up, he's wearing these like bright red pants and this kind of like, cool vest, everything. He looked like Sean Connery looked like in Highlander when he was playing a Spaniard.
Right.
Mustache too, I swear.
And you have Christophe Lambert, who is not Scottish at all. So yeah, it's pretty funny. Pretty funny. Anyway, so yeah, quick fun fact about Peter Sallis, who plays the mayor, Clifford Evans, who plays Don Fernando. Sorry, hang on a second. Yes, Don Alfredo, sorry. So Don Alfredo is the one who is Leon's foster father. But the priest and Don Alfredo are in talking to the mayor, trying to convince them that, it's this curse is going on and he's an innocent and he needs to be locked up, et cetera, et cetera. Peter Sallis, who is also in Taste the Blood of Dracula, is one of the three nefarious fathers who the sins of the father were visited upon the children. Peter Sallis plays Wallace in the Wallace and Gromit short films and the feature Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Really?
How fun is that?
That's very fun. Wow.
Yep. I had no idea. And I of course, called up our buddy John Kitley and I went, did you know this? And he's like, of course I know that. Everybody knows that.
Oh, I actually noticed his new Discover the Horror podcast is called Hammer, in parentheses, Is It, and parentheses, Horror. So I still have to listen to it. I feel like they might be having the same kind of discussion as we are today.
That's good.
Yeah. But yeah, the whole idea of Christina, now she, of course, as happens in a lot of these kinds of movies, she's young, she's beautiful, she's kind, and she's also engaged to be married to a complete jerk who's kind of like a wealthy man of status in the town. But she develops, if I have one critique of the film, it's that her relationship with Leon forms like lightning fast. I swear to God, they met, and in the next scene,
it's been like a week, and you're like, wow, they've met each other 3 times already.
Right, and they're all sneaking kisses and making plans to run away together.
Yep.
But when she comes to stay with him, and he passes out, he's starting to have one of his episodes. Oliver Reed has the best sweat face possibly in the history of cinema, because it looks like a special effect, but he's just like perspiring and his head looks like it's about to pop like a grape. I mean, you don't need these crazy effects transformations like you'd have years later in American Werewolf in London to get the idea that something is going on inside his body. But she spends the night with him. He wakes up the next morning. He's like, did I transform? Did anything weird happen? She's like, no, you were asleep and you're having some bad dreams or something. And that's when he realizes, I guess, that it's the power of love that kept this thing at bay. And so it was a really good idea for them to stay together. Unfortunately, circumstances kept them apart, partially because he gets thrown in jail on suspicion of these brutal killings that happened that night.
Yeah. Well, Oliver Reed had appeared for Terence Fisher in Sword of Sherwood Forest and Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, which were two smaller parts. And this was kind of his grand coming out. And he also appeared in The Damned, which also came out the same year. I mean, I think in 1961 alone, I think Hammer released something like 7 or 8 films in 1961 alone. Wow. And I'm just like, because I was flipping through, I was like, oh my gosh, that was 61, that was 61, that was 61. I mean, Scream of Fear was 1961. So, but anyway, to Oliver Reed, again, as you say, he doesn't even show up until like 75 minutes into the movie. It's like, or that can't be right, like 45 minutes in the movie, but it's a long time before we see our leading man. But once he shows up, boy, does he take over that movie. And it really is A Star is Born. You know, you see somebody, you're like, wow, that person is just commanding the screen. He's really interesting. He's vulnerable. He's powerful. He's manly. You know, so there's so much going on. And he gets it. It's a really terrific showcase role for him. And also the fact that, you know, he's covered in hair for the last, 10 minutes of it. So when you think about like his actual screen time, is pretty incredible.
It is. I couldn't get over the fact that he looked like a very young Javier Bardem throughout the entire thing. And that's not a criticism.
That's not the worst thing in the world.
But, when he does, and we're jumping ahead of it here, but when he does go full, Wolfman at the end, another thing that surprised me is he's still very much recognizable as Oliver Reed. He's not completely covered in hair. In fact, it's almost like the periphery, and then in the middle, he's got the kind of the crazy eyes and a little bit of stash here, but you really see the face. You're allowed to appreciate the acting that goes into it, because even though he's a feral beast, you can still tell there's struggle. Now, whether or not that's the struggle of the man inside trying to take over again, or just this panicked monster who is awakened and all of a sudden there's like torches and mobs after him and he's doing weird parkour up the sides of buildings in Spain.
Well, and Roy Ashton, who did the makeup here, as well as many other Hammer classics, rumor has it that he saw, he lobbied for Reed to get cast because he could see the possibilities of what he could do with Reed's face as it existed. You haven't seen these yet, but Werewolf of London, Henry Hull plays the main character, and it's very similar to what we see here in that you've got, we still see the face. The face of the actor appears, and it's kind of all just built around it, whereas the Wolfman in 1941, that one, Lon Chaney Jr. is completely obscured. Like that was Jack Pierce's MO, was to just completely hide the actor underneath. And I think this is kind of a great kind of blend of those two approaches, in that it's clearly a beast. There's it's clearly not just a human with some yak hair stuck on, but at the same time, as you point out, like the actor is allowed to shine through it. And that was I think it's just it's certainly my favorite of Roy Ashton's work. I just think it's one of the best werewolves, in cinema history. I mean, in terms of like not an animatronic, but like an actual, werewolf, it's light years ahead of, say like Michael Landon and I Was a Teenage Werewolf. And I think it rivals what Jack Pierce did with Lon Chaney Jr.
The only thing I would say that was a bit dodgy were the chia hands, where you see like,
yes, okay,
puffy and weird gaudy black nails and just like hair filling in. I'm like, this is like the intern unit that was allowed to.
Well, what would have been interesting is if those had actually been, I mean, like, it seems like they're almost turning into paws, and yet that's not what, ultimately, Oliver Reed as Leon as the wolf still has hands. But I thought that was an interesting, I was like, wow, look at, it's like it's turning into these like, little wolf paws. But then they don't kind of commit to it. So,
yeah, there was kind of an iconic scene where he's in the, I think it's when he's in the dungeon, or he's attacking somebody, but it's very dark, and there's like this little triangular shaft of light that just kind of falls over one eye, and you can see his face fully. It's not completely obscured in darkness, but you can't really tell what you're looking at, and it's just it's horrifying. There's another, not exactly a jump scare, but it's when he's, he lunges at the camera as he's attacking his victim. It's very effective. And I was like, I don't know what the reception of this movie was, but I can imagine being in a big grand movie palace in 1961 where these characters are all 100 feet tall and just having the crap scared out of me by this monster coming at my face.
Well, and there's our obligatory, Michael Ripper appearance, as the old drunken cellmate of Leon.
That's right. Yes. And I kept wondering if somehow they brought back the beggar from the beginning of the movie, because they're so similar. I think probably just in terms of the way they're dressed and made up
did you recognize our beggar from the beginning?
I thought it was Max von Sydow.
That's Richard Wordsworth, who played Carroon in Quatermass Experiment. that's him.
Now I got to go back and watch this again.
Turning in yet another terrific performance, and one of very few words.
Yes. And so you want to talk about what it takes to build sympathy for a character. I mean, that whole opening, bit with the court, going into the bar and then running into these like cynical bastards, and not that they don't have reason to be, but you just get the feeling, a complete sense of this horrible world. And by the end of the movie, that sense is confirmed. Now, I guess the father figure to Leon, he ends up having to put his son down. Now, he's referred to as uncle throughout the entire movie, except for the one part where I can't remember the exact line, but Leon says, "Father, help me," or something like that, or "Don't let them do this to me." And he uses that particular word, and it's just so powerful. You can see it affected the other character. Yeah. So when he goes up into that bell tower with the shotgun, and there's like the big ringing bell, it's not overly dramatic the way that I can imagine somebody taking the same material today and doing it, but you just feel that sadness.
Yeah, and I mean that sequence in the clock tower, or in the bell tower, is just, I think it's a great kind of action piece, because like he's up there, he's swinging the bells, or rather they're ringing the bells to kind of drive him crazy, and he starts doing battle with them, and then Don Alfredo climbs the ladder, and wow, what a squib, like when he shoots him, it's like
and you see it go through the front, the splatters on the front and the back, so you get that sense that like tore through them. Yeah.
Yep. And actually that's a good kind of transition point. This movie got just destroyed by the censors. It was in Britain. They cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. They didn't want to see any. It was supposed to be that the beggar had somehow turned into a werewolf, and that was in the script stage, and they're like, no, we're not going to have any kind of bestiality, so they're like, nope, that's out.
Oh, bestiality in terms of like when he attacked the peasant girl?
Correct. They're like, he can't be any kind of wolf. That's not okay. They had all sorts of issues with, like the imagery, the Christian imagery, when the Lady of Night is torn apart and just kind of like blood everywhere, that was gone. They couldn't have the scratches across her cleavage, the servant girl. I mean, there's just all sorts of things. And so the British audiences saw a very, very kind of snipped up version, and it didn't do very well, unfortunately, because in addition to that, people took issue with the fact that, you don't see a werewolf for, most of the movie, and there's no transformation, and so it didn't do as well. And what's, it has grown in estimation over the years and is now considered one of Hammer's finest films. But at the time, it was, like they were at the height of their power, and this is kind of when things started getting a little dodgy, because Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll didn't do well, this didn't do well, and Phantom of the Opera didn't do well. And so we were starting to see Hammer cresting their wave, as it were, and they were having to struggle a little more. And that's when we started seeing more and more of the Dracula and Frankenstein films. So they're like, we'll keep shoring things up with our tried and true brand.
And that's unfortunate. I mean, I love the movies that we've talked about, last year and this year, certainly, but this is so different. And again, you got to put yourself in the headspace of someone seeing this in 1961 with these expectations of a werewolf movie. I feel like it's refreshing because I've seen the tired, kind of not the Wolfman Universal stuff, but a lot of movies with werewolves in them, and they're just kind of all the same. So to see something really different, it stands out.
Yeah.
I did love the giant silver cross that was melted down by the hunter to create the bullets that would, the ball bearings, whatever, that would take out the werewolf. That was just, I just wondered, where's do we ever get a sense of where the knowledge of this mythology came from in this town? Like, are we to believe that there have been other werewolves, or?
Yeah, and I don't know that. I mean, but there does seem to be like, this is the thing that has to be done.
Yeah.
Like we know that a silver bullet is called for, and it's not like you have to have some like, professor character go, by the way, you need to have it's just common knowledge. There's a werewolf running around, get the silver. It's the only thing that's going to work.
It's just like no sex in spring. Yeah, it's you just know.
We should probably talk about the acting. I touched a little bit on Oliver Reed. I think Yvonne Romaine, who plays the servant girl, she became like an instant Hammer favorite, and she really has she doesn't have a very large role in it. And what's funny is, like, in the promotional materials, it showed the werewolf holding Yvonne Romaine, which never actually happens, because that's his mom and she's dead. But anyway,
together in the afterlife. That was after the movie.
Well, and I mean, what my point is that, like, Catherine Feller, who plays Christina, she got the gig, obviously, and I think she's quite good, but she's not kind of a traditional Hammer glamour female, like Yvonne Romaine is more of that ilk. She's got just a different look to her. And I think that, like, that's why Yvonne Romaine ended up in the promotional materials, as opposed to, I'm blanking on her name. I just said it, but Catherine Feller.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. But I think Catherine Feller is actually quite lovely in her own way, and in her sincerity. It really, I kind of, went off on Madeline Steele in not Madeline Steele, Madeline Smith, sorry, in Vampire Lovers. I was like, oh, she just grates on my every nerve. Whereas I think Catherine Feller, she used to not. I was kind of like, you're not what I expected. But as I've watched this film over the years, I'm like, I really like what you're doing here, and you don't annoy me. You're just a genuine love interest, which is really nice. And she's more than, I guess my point is, she's not just a love interest.
Yeah,
she's a full character.
She is. I like that that bit of complication, and you realize just how deep the kind of family secret runs, because when she goes to the jail to be with her, to be with Leon, like the law is there, and so the judge or the priest and the dad. And she's like, oh, he's my fiance. Like, oh, really? So you know all about him? She's like, yeah, I know everything about him. I was like, so you know about the transformation or whatever? She's like, sorry, what?
That didn't come up somehow. But I think, the woman who plays Don Alfredo's servant is lovely, kind of our mother figure. I think Clifford Evans as Don Alfredo is just wonderful. It's like everything's so nice, and it's subtle and warm and welcoming. And he's in, oh my gosh, my poor brain today. He's in Kiss of the Vampire, and he has a much more kind of flamboyant performance in that. But I really love his work here. I love the work of the priest. Anthony Dawson, who plays the Marquez de Sinestro, what a lovely name, but he's just awful. And I love Richard Wordsworth as the beggar. I just think it's a really terrific cast, and everybody's given a moment to shine.
I gotta say, yeah, the Marquez, I don't know exactly what it is about that performance, but it was so effective that I felt disgusted, but I also felt kind of afraid. The whole time I'm like watching, like, why does anybody in this court put up with this jackass?
Well,
and then when he exercises his power, and it's clear that he has he's a true villain. He has no human emotion or regard for anyone.
Right.
And when the beggar says, have a good night, he thinks that he's like, having a dig about how, because he knows that he's going to go do horrible things to his young bride. He just assumes that this guy's giving him crap for it, when the beggar is probably just like,
have a good night.
Yeah, thank you. The first person to give me wine and food in like weeks. Thank you. Even though he's been sold as a pet for $10 or whatever the going. What were that currency? I kept thinking there was potatoes.
Peseta? Was it peseta?
Yeah. I thought they were saying potatoes. I'm like, you're not selling yourself potatoes, are you?
I mean, these are really good quality potatoes.
Sure.
But I was listening to the commentary, and they were talking, like when the Marquez, after he's dying of whatever, like syphilis that he's contracted, but he's like picking at his sores, and which I think kind of goes to your point where you're like, oh, he's just awful. But apparently Anthony Dawson was just doing that like off camera, and Terence Fisher's like, oh no, we're putting that in. That's good.
Oh yeah, there's not a bad, I don't think, performance in this movie. In fact, there's a lot of really strong ones, and the fates of the characters are not, ensured by who they play in the film. Like we mentioned, the best friend gets kind of off early in the proceedings. I had expected Don Alfredo to meet some kind of a demise, but he ends up being the ultimate hero in the end. There was no, I think this might be the first werewolf movie that I've seen where there's no regression transformation at the end.
That's right.
He dies a wolf and he stays a wolf, and dad throws the coat over him, and that's kind of how the movie ends. And I forgot to mention, we said that Oliver Reed doesn't show up until like 45 minutes in. He's actually in the first shot of the film, the opening credits.
Right.
This wonderful extreme
I'm
close-up.
so glad you brought that up. Yeah.
With the credits going over his face, and then the only thing you can really make out is these moments where single tears roll down his cheeks, and that's a great thesis statement for this movie. It's like, oh, they weren't just bad contacts. This is all about like how he's conflicted and he's a tragic character.
Yeah. Well, apparently, I don't know. Did you listen to some of the commentary about that? Because
I don't have this. I just rented it off of Amazon.
Okay, because Shout Factory put this out a couple years back, and so that's the only time that Leon has brown eyes is in those opening credits, is because because the contacts hurt so badly that he couldn't wear them. So they're like, everybody had this great idea for these opening credits, and they had him wearing it, and they have the tear appliances built into the mask. And so like, it's not just, it's not Oliver Reed crying, but there's actually, tears being generated. But they had this great idea that like they would zoom in, and they're like, that's fantastic, except for like, it's really it's difficult to manage the zoom. So what we'll do is we'll start in and we'll pull back, and we'll just reverse the film, which they thought, that's a great idea. That's a great idea, until they saw the dailies the next day, and the tears were rolling back up. And so Oliver Reed, who had suffered, had to do another take, and so that they could get the tears coming out of the eyes as opposed to rolling back in, because that would have been an interesting thesis statement. Yeah,
I'd watch that. Do they happen to have that footage on as an extra?
I did not see it. Did not see extra footage. But anyway, yeah. So that was the other nice thing about the Shout Factory releases. That was we were seeing the complete version without the censors having their way with it.
Yeah, I imagine the version I saw was probably that as well on Amazon, because I did see the slash across like the past girl's chest and all that. And that's the thing is, again, I think I mentioned years ago, I saw this Women of Hammer Horror coffee table book at a convention. I thought I knew what it was. I thought it was like just like saucy, like nudes or something. But now that we're going through the Hammer films, you realize that they are, there's very little nudity, especially in the early, later on, they kind of got into that, as we established. But just very classically beautiful women. Yes. And a lot of kind of plunging neckline, get-ups and everything, but, just damned sexy, naturally beautiful women. And they're not really exploited in this film. It's more they're appreciated, much like the men are. I mean, we talked about Oliver Reed, even when he's not sweaty and kind of grape pop bloated, he's a damn fine fine specimen.
Agreed. I mean, I just want to talk really quick about Roy Ashton, because he did the makeup for Plague of the Zombies, for The Reptile, Devil Rides Out, several of which we're going to be talking about later on this year. So you'll get to but this was one of the first time that he actually had time and budget, and it just, I'm really just so pleased with what he was able to come up with. One other fun fact is that if you look sharp during the Marquez sequence, the footman who answers the door, that is Desmond Llewellyn, who would go on to play Q in all of the James Bond movies.
I knew that face from somewhere.
Yep.
Wow.
So he's the one who brings him in and introduces him to the court, introduces the beggar to the court.
I think it's because that's pretty much the only time we see him.
That's right.
By the time I was like, wait, who was that guy? We're on to something else, and he never shows up again. But wow, that's great. All right. Well, any final thoughts on the Curse of the Werewolf?
I mean, as I kind of mentioned, I mean, I think what's really nice about this is that it does borrow all of these werewolf tropes. You got the full moons and the silver bullets and the curses, and it tosses them in with, that same, love conquers all, and the Jekyll and Hyde, lust awakens the beast within, and even if we're not necessarily given a satisfying explanation as to why or how Leon transforms into a wolf, because I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because, just because his mother was raped by an ordinary innocent madman, and then he was born on Christmas Eve, it's like, oh, well, then I guess you have to turn into a wolf. I don't know that we're actually given nobody ever explains that. But I think the story is just told so well and acted so well, and just handsome production design, you just kind of go along with it. And you don't find yourself nitpicking until, later, when you go, well, wait a minute, why is that? Like we never really got an explanation.
Well, I think that kind of works in the fact that we don't have a Van Helsing type character who's coming through town who can say, oh, I've been studying this lore for, decades, and this is what needs to happen. That because this is, it takes place in the past, and you get this feeling it's a small village with lots of superstitions. We know about as much as the characters know. If you were to ask them, they'd be like, no, that doesn't make any sense, but it's happening right now, so grab your torch. We don't have time to do this. There's a monster on the loose.
And can we just talk about, like, when he's up there with that flaming hay bale and he throws it down? God. I was like, okay, that was dangerous. That was legit dangerous. You just threw a flaming hay bale at like a crowd of people. Like, okay, everybody, when the hay bale comes your way, get out of the way. Okay, good, go.
Well, I just love that from a story point, because it reminds me, you see this in like mobster movies and stuff, where someone will throw a Molotov cocktail, and then someone else will like pick it up and then throw it back. This is like the medieval version of that, because the mob throws a torch. Right,
they throw a torch and it sets it on fire.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God, he's gonna burn. They're gonna burn him out of the house, but no, he just picks up like, screw you.
Oh man, I love that. So speaking of things that don't make sense, this is my last fun fact for the podcast, I promise. But isn't it interesting that Don Alfredo is our narrator, and he starts off saying 200 years ago. It's like, well, wait, how are you narrating this story that you're in that happened 200 years ago to a modern day audience?
Well, okay, I can explain this.
Good.
This is in the Hammer universe, right? So what happened was, after this whole werewolf incident, he decided, you know what, I need to get out of here. I'm going to go for a trip to Transylvania.
There you go.
And he gets turned into a vampire, because we never see him narrating. We only hear him narrating. So he could be telling the story at night to his other vampire friends.
That's right. That's right. He could easily be 200 years old.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. That has haunted me for years. And now I can just watch this movie and relax.
I'm glad you can finally enjoy the Curse of the Werewolf.
There was no Friday the 13th reference. I'm surprised.
I failed you.
No. You just surprised me. And sometimes that's its own reward.
Now I'm scrambling to think of one, and I just can't. Except there was a bale of hay in Friday the 13th.
This part three. There you go.
Okay, fine. I am redeemed.
Thank you.
All right, sir. Well, what do we have coming up next month? Do you know offhand?
I thought I would pull that up, and then I forgot. So I'll have that for you in just a second. Why don't you do our outro while I pull that up?
Well, Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Do you have a written review of this that you're going to share with us?
I do. I will send that to you pronto so that you have it.
Awesome. And then folks can check that out in the description below.
Wait a second.
Uh-oh.
There we go. Okay. Whew. I was like, wait, we weren't supposed to do this month. In June, we will be doing a double feature, our first double feature of the year.
Oh boy.
We'll be doing Plague of the Zombies and The Reptile, 2 films I just referenced that Roy Ashton does the makeup on.
Wow.
Both are from 1966.
All right. And what's your read on them? Like, kind of, am I in for a good time or a time?
I think you're in for a great time.
Whoa.
I really like both of these films. They're both directed by John Gilling, and they were shot around the same time, not just by their 1966 timestamp, but they were actually shot on the same sets in some cases. So it's a great example of Hammer economy and yet a very diverse storytelling.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to that, and gotta clear the old calendar for a double feature. Yikes. But all right. Well, thank you again, sir. This has been a lot of fun as always. Son of Hammerland is continuing. It's continuing a tradition that we started last year, and I like the fact that we are off the Dracula and Frankenstein movies, and just as you just said, the diversity of types of stories and movies that we're looking at has just been fantastic. So I think we're in for a really great second half of the year.
Absolutely, I agree.
All right, sir. Take care. And yeah, folks, check out Aaron's stuff. And yeah, join us back here next month for Son of Hammerland, June 2022. And excellent. That's the best way to go out. Wait, well, let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. Ow! How was that?